Hey everyone, welcome to Past Lives and the Divine. I'm Gina, the host of this podcast, and today I have a little spooky episode for you. So, to give a little context for what we're covering today, which is all about entities and attachments. So, if you are even the slightest bit interested, I think you're really going to like this episode. If you have fear, it's one of the things that we talk about in this episode. So, this episode holds an audio recording or part of an audio recording of a class within the Hypnotic Arts Training. And the Hypnotic Arts Training is the hypnosis training that I have created and co-lead with Sarah Leverett of Intuitive Empowerment. And it is designed for you or anyone to feel like these sessions seem kind of cool. I think maybe I would want to lead these sessions. And you certainly can, and you will feel confident and you will be more than ready if you move through the Hypnotic Arts Training. So if you want to find out more about that training, or if you listen to this episode and you're like, wait, maybe I do want to learn more about that training, just see the link in the show notes. You can also go to the hypnoticartstraining.com. Okay, so in this episode specifically, I'm sharing part of a class that we dedicate to the topic of entities and attachments. And a lot of times I will hear from students that they will be talking about the training while they're going through the Hypnotic Arts Training. And they might talk about something like entity release or working with attachments or even the space between lives. And the response that these students get is, hey, why are you working on that stuff? You're not old enough in terms of being a hypnotist. You haven't been working in this field long enough. And Sarah Leverett and I believe very, very strongly that it would be foolish for us to teach you how to navigate these unseen realms via hypnosis with your clients and not train you on the shadow side of it all. Because no matter what we're doing, no matter what we're seeing, no matter what we're experiencing, the equal and opposite is always available to us. And so if we go into these unseen realms thinking that we know everything, and there's just things that we don't have to deal with if we don't want to, I think that that's pretty foolish. So in the Hypnotic Arts Training, we train you on many things, including how to deal with entities and attachments that might show up in a hypnosis session. I feel so passionately about this topic. I think if we go about it in a way where we can feel our fear, yes, of course, we've all been programmed to feel fearful about these topics. And we have to know and never forget how powerful we are, because we are the most powerful entity in any room. So you'll hear me cover that today. Fear is normal. Know your power. You'll feel more peace. What else you're going to hear in this episode is why we teach this. And again, sometimes we get pushback from that. What is an entity? What is an attachment? How do I see these things? How is this the same or different from an energetic release that we sometimes see at the end of a past life regression? I'm also talking about something that we cover in the Hypnotic Arts Training well before this class. This part of the class that you're going to hear in this episode actually is one of the last classes that we teach. And so throughout the training, we talk about this idea of client-centered approach, and what that means to Sarah and I, and how we teach that is really about focusing on the client, where they're at, what are their needs, what are their fear levels, how to talk about these things with a client, when to not talk about these things with the client. If a client doesn't want to work on it, what do you do? So we talk about our client-centered approach in the vein of dealing with entities and attachments when we're working with our clients. And then, of course, we talk about working with fear specifically, like I said. And we're covering it from like when you're the hypnotist, the facilitator, and you're afraid, and how to, as the facilitator, as the hypnotist, really guide and lead your clients through releasing an entity or an attachment if they feel ready, or helping to just make them feel like loved, safe, whole while they're working in these spaces to release any entities or attachments that may come in intentionally or unintentionally. I'm sharing this with you today because 'tis the season. It is October. And I think a lot of people are afraid of entities and attachments, ghosts, aliens, paranormal stuff. To me, if we know our power, the fear just kind of goes away. I've talked before about this podcast and on different October episodes just about my growth and transmutation of all of my fear that I used to have around these things, and have really channeled it into learning about them, experiencing them, understanding my power and my gifts in terms of like navigating spaces, navigating sessions, navigating release techniques for or around these entities or attachments. And it's helped me so much that even if you're not a hypnotist, my hope is that you listen to this. Maybe it's a little holiday entertainment, a little seasonal entertainment, or hopefully it allows you to just feel a little bit more powerful, a little bit less fearful in the space of entities and attachments. What you're going to hear today, just one more thing, is such a small, tiny slice of what we offer in the Hypnotic Arts Training. So if you're at all interested and want to see all the different classes, all the different topics, all the different resources, you can go to the hypnoticartstraining.com. You can also click on the link in the show notes. And as always, if you listen to this episode and you really like it, I would really appreciate it if you sent it to a friend or gave it a 5-star review, maybe even both. Either way, thanks so much for being here. Okay, gather around the fire for a conversation about entities and attachments. Good, as we officially step in, welcome. Some people may feel, or at least I have encountered people, and I don't want to assume that we all have this knowledge. So I like to just kind of start at the basics. But in hypnosis, we are dealing in these unseen realms. That's why we work on intuition alongside all the skills and tools that we need. And just like everything on earth, there's like stuff that's super comfortable and wonderful, and things that are uncomfortable and things that we didn't wish were a part of it. And in these unseen realms, whether it's your intention to like go full force and like work in these spaces or not, I feel like it's good to just know, because we are operating in these unseen realms. And we'll get into kind of how we position this to clients if needed. But if something comes up, I just can't teach hypnosis without touching on this. And I think it's an important part. And oftentimes you might hear other hypnotists who have gone through other trainings. I know this happened to some of our alumni, where other hypnotists would be like, you can't learn that. You've only been doing this for a hot second. And I don't know. Everyone's got their reason for doing things. I don't want to cast judgment because I don't know why people do the things they do. But for me personally, I feel like it would be neglectful for me to just pretend like these things aren't there. We live in this universe. In this universe, like our free will as a human is paramount. I believe that. It's reinforced every day in my work when I work with clients. I can feel when someone or we are made to do something against our will. Like we can feel how like heavy that feels. It's a free will universe. So as a human, you are of spirit, you are a soul, and you are of earth. You have a body, an earth suit. And so it's important that you know that like in any situation, because of your free will, because of the magic of the human intention, any situation you hold power. You hold power in every situation where you are. And if you hear a funny noise in your, you can literally, if you hear a funny noise in your house or encounter an attachment or an entity, like with our intention, we can move that energy. And they need to abide, like spirits in the spiritual world. It's the law. They need to abide by it. I was just watching a video from Amy Dempster, Earth Tenders Academy. She has Earth Keepers podcast. And the way she spun it, I thought was so cute and like whimsical and playful. And she said, if we are being like haunted, whether we're in a hypnosis session or haunted in your basement, it's really like these other entities, if they are a sentient being, playing a trick on us. Like they know we have the power to make it stop, and they're not going to tell us that. And so just to reinforce that, that to me, I think if we can witness that power, whether it's through us or by listening to a podcast episode or watching a session, I think that we will see that it's not about never feeling fear. It's about always knowing your power. Like that is the key. So I just want you to know that if you have fear around it or anxiety around it, just know that that's totally normal. It's probably going to be a lot less after this class, and it will continue to dissipate. Yeah, so with that, let's see, what else do I want to say? I'm teaching this, and it's all from my own experience. I am pulling from a couple books, which I reference throughout this conversation. I'm pulling from a previous training I did, and mostly it's from just my own experience with this whole topic. So I just want you to know that it is from my experience. If you have a different experience, that's totally valid. If you don't necessarily agree with everything I say right now, that's okay. If you don't agree with everything I say in 5 years, that's okay. I probably won't either. Like we're all evolving. So I just want you to know, like, that's the snapshot. I don't consider myself like a capital E expert on like entities or anything like that. But I have worked with them a lot. And I have myself like overcome so much fear in that space. So I'm not sure who was on here before, but or who missed it before. But while we were kind of in the first couple minutes before we did the opening meditation, if you want to hear more, I have more podcast episodes that were released in the past few months of like remote entity removals. And while that's not something that, I mean, maybe you would accidentally come into that in a hypnosis session, but that's a very intentional session. We're going to do a remote entity removal. And even though we're not going super into detail into that modality today, it is a way for you to like listen and hear how it's just not as scary as we think it is. And oftentimes these entities, these attachments can actually take on a really terrifying form because they're trying to get our attention. And I believe that was actually mentioned as well in the session with Sarah that you listened to. But I've encountered entities that have told me that. I've encountered other clients who have said, oh, it was so scary because it needed to get my attention. Otherwise, I wouldn't have paid attention to it. So just to know that. To know we've all been programmed that this is all scary and out of our control, and it's just absolutely not the truth. Okay, so we're first going to go over like what is an entity / attachment. We're going to just touch again on the idea of the client-centered approach, and more specifically like what that means here. We'll touch on like working with fear, your fear, a facilitator's fear, a client's fear. It's all very natural. We can still do this work and hold fear. We talk about susceptibility. There's a lot of crazy notions about susceptibility of like who gets an attachment, who doesn't get an attachment or an entity. We'll talk about just some ethics that Sarah and I have put together of when we kind of sat down and we were like, okay, how do we believe, this work should go? So it's really kind of like an extension off that client-centered approach. And then we'll talk about some release techniques. So if you do encounter this in a session, what you could do for that, all the different ways. So it's, yeah, okay. I was going to go off on a tangent, but I'll rein it in. Okay. So what is an entity or an attachment? So there are so many different thoughts on what these things are. You might read some books or hear information from some people who say most of the people in the world have some sort of entity or attachment. Some people say that. Some people say it's very rare. Some people think of it as you have an attachment, you're immediately like possessed, like all those old movies that I've never seen because I couldn't even watch the previews back then. And it really is, who knows? It really, to me, what it comes down to is like how people identify what is an entity, what is an attachment. So for the conversation today, and from my point of view, I really believe that when we're talking about removing or releasing an entity or an attachment, it's a spectrum of things. So I have removed an entity or an attachment from myself. That was, I think it's in episode 9 of the podcast. But it was basically an attachment between my shoulder blades. It's my understanding that it was there, just continual feeling, not releasing, not expressing negative emotions, kind of just like carrying them, holding them, stuffing them down. And in that, I kind of think of it as almost like not necessarily a time thing, but like a repetition thing. And so even though that to me was really kind of this accumulation of energy, it did take on like kind of a sentience. Like when I was in hypnosis, examining this attachment on my back, I was able to ask it questions. And so to me, is it that it's more malevolent because it answers my questions? I don't know. I honestly think it kind of just depends on like, what is this? Is this accumulated emotion? Is this something you haven't moved through? Is this even reoccurring physical pain? Sometimes people can say can turn into some sort of energetic attachment. We can, of course, also pick up like a full-on earthbound spirit attachment. If sometimes I've had a client who had I've had a few clients with children attached to them, children who were not their own. And it really is kind of a spectrum of energy. It's not always these bad, scary things. And even like a bad, scary thing, like the snake that Sarah saw, even that, it's like once we give it a little attention, we can kind of get a sense more so like, what is this energy underneath? Like, what is it bringing our attention to? So that's why I use the terms entity and attachment. And it really is kind of, I think of an attachment as more so like an emotion, a stuck emotion, and an entity more so as like something I can have a conversation with. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's always an earthbound spirit. So it really is a spectrum of energy. And of course, with that spectrum is like all kinds of reasons why these things are attached to us. These attachments, these energies, they can attach to us for any reason. They can be something that oftentimes, if it's an earthbound spirit, even though the circumstances are always a little bit different, it's kind of like this underlying theme of like, basically they saw in this human what they wanted or needed, whether it was like a warm light, like a mom, or someone fun, or someone who shares those issues with you. So it really, what are these things specifically in all the different levels? I think it's more helpful to think of it as like an attachment or an entity, and it's just kind of a spectrum. And instead of giving you all kinds of like labels and possibilities that quite honestly, I think just evoke a lot of fear, I think it's more effective to label what it really is that it's energy that we have the ability to understand and release. So, and again, these could be external, kind of attaching to us. They could be emotions within us, fragments of our soul or something like that, many, many different ways. But that's essentially how you're going to see it, I would imagine, come into your hypnosis session. So whether it's like the client today, we removed a slab of cement off her chest, and it was like there for protection. She didn't need it anymore. It was causing a lot of anxiety. And so with that, I think of that as an energetic attachment and that we should release. So it's not malevolent. It served a purpose at one point. We no longer need it anymore. Let's move on from it. So something like that, I've had, like I said, where it's like an earthbound attached to them. I had a client who had sexual abuse trauma as a child, and that wasn't even a part of the session. I didn't even know that about this client. And it came to be like this attachment that was with her. And And she was afraid of it. And so we literally just did what we needed to do to sever that cord, I think is what we did in that case, and sent him away. He didn't want to go to the light or anything like that. So it's really about like knowing that these things can show up and that the release techniques are all pretty similar. And it's less about like, is this a ghost? Is this a possession? Is this, whatever. People oftentimes will think of it like in terms of possession. Like if you say entity releasement or something like that, they think of possession. And that's not something I've ever encountered in a hypnosis session. I would frankly be surprised if you did. It's my understanding that the vast majority of these situations, it's more of like a parasitic attachment, meaning you're living, you might even be thriving on some levels, but these are taking energy from you, or they're giving you maybe emotions that don't feel like yours, or your clients. And so the idea is that like, it's more so that like oftentimes people will think like, oh, I have one, I'm totally out of control. And to think of it more as like parasitic than possessive, I think is a smart way to think of that. And then because even in that, if you were to encounter like a full-on possession state, even then the release techniques would be similar. Sometimes people will ask like, where or how are these attached to someone? I've had people explain it as like, it's just this hovering darkness around me. And maybe it moves, maybe it's always in one spot. Sometimes people will say, like mine was attached like right to my back. And sometimes people will say like, oh, I feel like it's attached. And they'll say like, it's attached to my aura, or it's always, like right off of me. So it really, none of that matters, like the ins and outs of how we describe all of that. And frankly, I kind of think it evokes a lot of fear to be like, oh, it's even closer to you. It's attached to your body and not just your energy fields. So to know that the way it's attached can come into many, many different ways. And that's not super important. If it is important, it would be important for the client to know that and use that information to help release it. And then, of course, if someone has an entity or attachment, like the signs or symptoms are so variable. I'm personally not clairvoyant. I can't look at anybody and say, whoa, you have an attachment. And we'll get into that. We shouldn't say that anyway, or we recommend that you don't say that anyway. But it really, we'll never know. And the point is that these are going to come up in a session in a way that we're probably not expecting. And just to know that like the signs and symptoms, instead of me giving you a list of all the things that could come through or I've noticed coming through, it really is just about getting to the heart of like, why is this client here? What are their intentions? And if some sort of attachment comes in, whether it's energetic, emotional, or it's like an entity that's sentient, just to get to the heart of like, why it's there, how are we going to release it, and let's call something in that we want instead. So all of those are going to be the same. That's like why we do these sessions, right? To kind of get to the heart, their intention, and how to take their intention, what we experienced, and how they can maybe integrate that into their life, like with the questions like, why did you see this past life? Why were you made known of this entity or attachment if that were to come in? So yeah, the last bullet point, I guess I kind of already went over, but just the idea of the different ways to move this energy. We've talked about it on different levels. We'll talk about it again today, but it's really about helping the client identify it, what it feels like, and in their mind, what would help them to release it. You want a vacuum? Do you want a knife to cut that cord? Do you want to take it off like a backpack? Do you want to use a magnet to pull it out? Do you want your spirit guides to take it off? Whatever. We'll go more into knowing that. But there are so many different ways we can go about these sessions that I just like to boil it down to like the very nitty gritty, the things that we need to know, not the scary labels or anything like that. So an entity or an attachment is just something that is on or near us that we don't want there to be anymore. So that is how I would describe that. Lot of gray area there. I mean, a lot of gray area in these unseen realms, period. So when we're doing these sessions, when we're working with entities or attachments, it's always so important to do the client-centered approach. And I'll bring that up here again, just to say over and over and over that the most impactful session for a client is going to be a client who feels safe and relaxed. And so we let them lead. So I am never going to say, I think you have an entity attachment. Like, even if I think there is an entity attachment, I'm not going to say it. Fear can make us so narrow-minded, like in such an unhelpful way. And to evoke fear like that in a client in a hypnosis session is not only going to be unhelpful for the session, but overall, I think it's just igniting even more fear in that client. So we want to just go through a session like you normally would. An example is I had a session with a client. She was a man in that life. She was in the delivery room with his wife. And I was just asking the regular questions, right? Like, oh, you're in this delivery room. It's kind of odd that you're here because you're a man, but this is your relationship. And this woman was like such a bright light in his life. And then it was like, what else are you aware of? My stock question I use before I move out of a scene or a memory is typically like, what else are you aware of here? And this client said, oh, there's like this dark energy around my wife. And I just like can't even look at her. I don't even want to look at it. And so I just reminded the client, you're totally safe. Do you feel like this is something that's like around you or like something that is your wife's? And it was very clear, like, this is maybe attached to my wife. But like still it's in the scene. So I personally am like, we should probably explore that because it's coming up, but let the client lead, right? So I say, we can dig into that a little more if you want, or we can move on. How does that feel to you? And I could tell that this client was like, let's move on. I don't want to dig into it. Cool. That's not up for me to say, hey, you should really check out that attachment you might have. I could be wrong. I have no idea. The client is sharing, what do they say? Like 10 or 25% of what they're experiencing. So that client went through the past life regression, liked the session, came back for another one, and this energy showed up again. And then it was at that time where I was like, oh, we're seeing this energy again. Do you want to deal with it? And it was like, she wanted to, but she was scared. She didn't know. So it was like, hey, you can pull out, watch it like a movie on a movie screen, or we can move completely away and do like a remote where she's not even near that energy, but she's putting her attention and her awareness on that energy and then answering my questions. And so it was in that second session that we were able to see it was a little boy that she picked up at some job she had in high school. And the little boy said, you just looked warm and friendly like my mom used to be. And I don't remember the whole story if we got his whole story, but in a past life regression like that, I'm not necessarily there to get his story. I'm there to get the client to because this is coming up, we're going to help transition that soul to the light if they want to go. And at the very least, the old saying of like, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Like that is the deal here as well. So, so lead with the client. The client will get there when they're ready. And us pushing them or us making assumptions isn't going to do much and may just evoke even more fear and resistance in them to tackling that someday. So my kind of method that I use is just like calm and cool. If you are someone who carries fear about this and it's like evokes fear to think of, encountering something like this in a session, for you to even be like, who do I want to be in this session? And you might feel your fear, but you can also embody like who you want to be in that session too. So just to know, like, you are in charge. This is your session and the clients, but you are facilitating this. And just to know, like, you can have fear, but show up, be there for the client, let the client lead. Most people are terrified of ghosts, aliens, paranormal stuff. And so to have something like that attached to you is just like, can be very, very traumatizing in itself. Like I shared earlier, I was so insane, just wildly scared of ghosts and all of those things. And I had someone come and do a Reiki session on me. And I tell this story on my podcast. And in a podcast episode, it was maybe October of last year or the year previously. But I was so afraid. And then she came in and cleansed the house again. I tell the whole story in that podcast episode. But the way she handled it, she was like, now you can't think about this or you'll attract it again. Don't be so scared. And it's like, oh, fuck. Yeah. Like, don't be scared. Like, that's fucking terrible advice. So I was awake for like 6 weeks straight. I couldn't like come back to my house when it was dark. Like, this fucking altered my life. And it wasn't until I was going to hypnosis for anxiety in this life that I was able to kind of uncover that and see how damaging that was to me. And to really meet myself where I was. It was very much like, I shouldn't feel this way. It's like, but you do. And it's not going to go away unless you, like, Gina meets herself where she's at. So little bit of a tangent. It can be very traumatizing. But if a client brings it to you and you're calm and cool and you've got all your skills, if it goes somewhere, great. If the client doesn't want to do it, great. And you can always give a hypnotic suggestion that, just so you know, it'll get easier and easier for you to understand that if you want it and to feel in your power. You are the most powerful person in your space. You're the most powerful being, entity in your space. So that would be something you could do if they didn't want to go into it and you maybe thought it was a little something, just like a little hypnotic suggestion reminding them of their power. So the only time I would explicitly, or the only time I would say, like, talk freely about the entities that you're aware of around or attached to your client is if they like clearly ask you for your read on the situation, then give them an honest read. Using your intuition and compassion, like if they look like they're devastated or terrified, maybe don't give them every gory detail that you're planning on giving them, but yeah, just use your intuition, use compassion. It doesn't matter to me if I feel like we shouldn't be afraid of this. Don't worry about it. I know that people are terrified about this. And yeah, so we got to just move with our intuition, be compassionate with these people, let them lead the way. So in terms of that client-centered approach too, we let the client lead the way. And there's no textbook way to like release these energies, just like there's no textbook way. I mean, we can get a script to access this information and to move someone through it. But like in terms of this is what's going on and this is exactly what we're doing isn't necessarily, I don't know, you know me, just when someone claims to know how everything works on the other side, I'm just like, really? Everything, you know, everything. I don't know. So there is no textbook way to release it, but we're going to go over with you just the ways that we do it, ways to think about it, techniques to use, that sort of thing. So before we get into that, let's talk about working with a little fear here. Okay. So like I said before, when we experience fear, even just a little bit of fear, our focus gets narrow, confusion amps up, and we don't know what to do. So we can feel fear and move forward, but I believe that fear can be even more of an obstacle, even more of something that blinds us and inhibits us when we don't acknowledge it. So just to know that it's totally normal for you to have any sort of fear around this and totally normal for your clients to have fear around this. So, the more you get comfortable in these spaces, the more you work with a client and they're, maybe they're like, oh, I have a lot of anger and they feel it in their chest. And we've talked about like doing an energy release and how it's like, feel it in your chest. Tell me what that feels like. How would you like to release it? And allow the client to imagine, to intuit how they want to release it, and then release that. You do that enough times, that's essentially how you get rid of any sort of entity or attachment. That's the basics of like, how does this client want to get rid of it? And we're going to go down that path. And you might have to help them and give them suggestions, but we want them to figure it out. So with that, we got to show up at least in a space where we feel a shred of confidence. Again, we are the most powerful entity in the room. We have, our soul, our spirit inside of us, and we have this earth suit. We can operate in many different realms. Even if you think about these entities or attachments, like they're not actually on the third dimension. Like we can't see them, we can't feel them, or we can't with our eyeballs. Maybe if you're clairvoyant, you can. Okay, so all of that to say, client fear, totally okay. Be expected, just the same way you would do it. Hold them in compassion, confidently guide them. Just know that it's not up to you to fix this for them. It's up to you to create a space and the opportunity for them to explore and release it. Yeah, just hold that client fear with empathy and understanding. Okay, so your fear as the facilitator, if you have it, again, more than okay, totally expected. So I would say as the facilitator, it's just your job to know, like when anything, including fear, is getting in the way of your ability to move the client through any situation in a hypnosis session. So when we are not equipped, when we don't know anything about these, entities and attachments, they can seem way more scary than they are. So it's really educating yourself on it and having just a few tools to move through it and scripts to move through it. That's going to help you just feel the fear and then just rely on your script. I also think that when we're in that hypnotic trance space, or when we're facilitating someone in that hypnotic trance space, it's even easier for us. I don't know if you all have experienced this, but it's almost like when I'm in my conscious state right here, if something happens, I feel an emotion, and then right away my thoughts start going. And I feel like one of the benefits for me and a lot of other people in hypnosis is like, you can feel an emotion, but your mind's not like, and I feel like when we're leading these sessions, even though we're not in hypnotic trance, we do have that calm essence within us. We are kind of on some sort of elevated plane. And so just to know that, like, if you feel that fear in the session, you'll be able to rely on your skills and techniques. These things will come to your mind and you know it, and you'll be able to move forward with it. And I'd be willing to bet if you ever encounter something like this, you'll do the thing. And then later on in the day, you'll think about all the other things you could have done in that session. And to me, I think that those thoughts are not about what I did wrong. And it's more like, yep, you did that right. You'll have to do it again. And here's some other ways that you could do that too. So if you're someone who like gets downloads, has, that intuition on, like trust that, and don't, if you have a situation with a client and you feel like, oh, I could have done these things better, like have compassion on yourself and really feel that, like, oh, what could I have done better? And that is a learning. That is you continuing your intuitive piece of this education. Okay.
Can I jump in for a second on working with fear?
Yeah, hell yeah.
So I have had multiple sessions where a dark, shadowy, cloudy, murky energy comes in, and, checked with my client, made sure they wanted to look at it, move through it, explore it. And upon asking questions, moving it, exploring it, getting to know it, that misty, murky cloudiness dissipated, and behind it was their spirit guide. And if you think about being a little kid and maybe you feel an energy in your room, you try to talk to your parents about it, your parents tell you, oh, monsters aren't real. Oh, that's just your imagination. Oh, not to trust that. Then over time, any sort of presence around you becomes something that you shouldn't be feeling or couldn't be feeling or isn't real. So over time, right, this fear of anything unknown builds and builds and builds and builds. And so the fear becomes that entity of cloudiness and murkiness and shadowiness, but really on the other side of it is just a spirit guide or a helpful being all along that just wanted you to know that you weren't alone. So I just want to share that sometimes we even learn from our society to have fear around anything unknown, even if it's, something helpful like a guide.
Wow, that is really interesting. Just how like the fear is the cloud around it. Ooh, yeah. Anything else you want to say about that, working with fear, Sarah, or even the client-centered approach?
I don't think so. It was just, multiple sessions like that were popping into my awareness. So I just wanted to share that it's another reason to get more comfortable with fear, because sometimes, on the other side of that fear is love.
Yeah. Yeah, wow, that's really cool. Good. Yeah, it's the more we can kind of move beyond our fear and get curious in a client session always being curious is such an advantage. And the same is here too. For me, one of the ways that working with fear helped me at the beginning was, and this is still a boundary, that the only entities or attachments that are allowed to come into a session with a client and me is if it's there and willing to be like released or healed, moved on. So it's only here for the highest and greatest good of the client. And for my entire career, which is like almost 5 years, that has never not been the case. I have never encountered something that was just malevolent, there to mess things up or be mischievous. Not that mischievous is bad, but it's like a waste of time in these sessions. Going back to boundaries, if that is something that you do fear and you're like, oh, I really want to limit my interaction with these things, we can set those boundaries. This is your session. You are the most powerful being in the room. In terms of like entities and things like that. We each are as humans. And so if that feels good to you to put something in place like that, to have some sort of ritual where you're like standing in your power, remembering your power, or you can just set it and forget it. I say that with my spirit guides all the time. Like, why do I need to continually set these boundaries? Why do I need to continually do these rituals? And my spirit guides I've posed that question in many different ways, and they always come back with, you don't need to, but you start to doubt it, and then you set the intention again, and we're good. It's like the doubt and the fear tears those things down. So for you, just understanding like what makes you feel safe, what makes you feel willing or more comfortable to stand in your fear. Is it about having those boundaries around the session? Really like, whether you set those boundaries with every session or set it once and forget it and just kind of like, yep, my spirit guide's got this, my higher self has this. It's really up to you. But a lot of times in this culture, it's like you either feel the fear and run or you feel the fear and like try to beat yourself into submission. And I'm saying just like feel the fear and try to understand what you need to feel better. If it is more education, if it is, witnessing more sessions that help you feel more powerful, like oh yeah, that would have been a scary session for me, but I listened and it was good, you know, or maybe you need to set those boundaries, or maybe whatever it is for you that helps you to show up and feel that fear and still just work with it. Have compassion with yourself, see what you need. Yeah. And with that, like I said, the boundaries are huge. That's my experience anyway. Sarah, I'm curious to know if you have any boundaries like this in terms of working with clients, working with like any boundaries you've set with your spirit guides.
Um, yeah, I think any reading I do, any hypnosis I do, I put that either in the opening meditation, if it's a reading or something like that, or in the induction, if it's the hypnosis. That only that which is going to serve my client and my client's deepest and truest path is welcome in this space. Anything that's not meant to serve the highest and best will be reflected back to nature, back to source. I just weave it into the induction.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I love that. Love the way you did that. Another thing too that we don't really talk about a lot when it comes to fear is like the fear of the entities, specifically, like if they have kind of a sentience about them. And it feels kind of weird to say. I feel very compassionate towards these entities, no matter how nasty they seem. If you were ever in a situation, if you ever wanted to do like a hypnotic, like remote entity removal session, or you were working in a space where you were using hypnosis and working with entities on some level, that like entities have fear. Like when we call them forward to talk to them or go to the light, like I have had entities say we weren't going to come forward, but we saw that it wasn't so scary. And so now we're coming forward. We want to go to the light, or we want to hear more about this, or we want to talk to you now and let you know that. So, fear all around. And I think that just having that compassion for that fear is huge. And if we just try to run from it or stuff it down or pretend like we don't have it, if that works for you, cool. But if it doesn't work for you all the time, which it might not, just meet yourself where you're at. That fear can feel really, really big. We can feel that and still focus on the technique, focus on the client, focus on the scene, focus on whatever, our breath. But yeah, working with fear is a big one. Okay. So susceptibility, I think, is another tool to invoke fear about these things, honestly. Just the idea of, from the overculture, if you grew up in a religion or with, dogmatic parents or something like that. But we often are just conditioned that some things are going to make us more susceptible to catching an entity or an attachment, like Ouija boards, satanic music, channeling, witchcraft, whatever innately opens us up to, these unseen realms. And my belief, Sarah, I'm curious to know what you think here, like just to circle back on it, because I feel like my beliefs are always evolving. But my belief is that the most powerful part of a Ouija board, any sort of satanic music or channeling, witchcraft, whatever, whether it's being used, benevolently or malevolently, the magic in that is the human in their free will and intention. So if you're, messing around with a Ouija board and you want to do those things to open yourself up to the unseen realms and any sort of energy that might want to talk to you, that's your free will. I don't necessarily think that's the magic of a Ouija board. I think that is the human free will. And taking something like the Ouija board in particular, that for, how long? Decades? I don't know. When was the Ouija board created? Hundreds of years? I have no idea. But just the idea of like, we all kind of have a feeling we know what that is, even if you've never played with a Ouija board. So just the idea of like the masses of human intention putting fear on something like a Ouija board, or a type of music or a type of witchcraft or whatever. It's the human that wants to do those things. It's the human that uses their free will and says, yes, please. If sometimes you'll hear like things too in the spiritual community of like using prescription or street drugs or alcohol, or being in a setting like a bar or a club, or walking through a crowd of like angry or really sad people, or sometimes you'll even hear like having sex with people who are not spiritually clean. And it's like, who's that? And who's policing that? Like it's just not how it is. It is the human that holds the power. Just like in hypnosis, it is the human, the client, that holds the power. If they don't want to be hypnotized, they're not going to be hypnotized. So just to know that all of these things aren't automatic catch an entity cards. It's the human inside of it and their intention inside of it. Okay, so a lot of times people will think like being in these spaces, or even just having these conversations, or even talking about an entity is a way to attract them. And if you believe that to be true, then it's my understanding that we create that reality. I choose not to believe that. And I have thankfully had many, many experiences in my life to know that it's just like, we have to say, yes, we want this. And operating in these spaces, in these unseen realms, people will say like, isn't it kind of scary? Like, how do you not know you're not picking something up? And it's like driving a car. Like, yes, if you are a wide open 14-year-old sensitive kid and you pull open the Ouija board, you might have an experience that does not feel good. Like, you might get scared with something. Just like if you've never driven a car, you have no idea how a car even runs, and someone turns it on for you and says, punch the gas. Like, that's dangerous. Cars aren't dangerous. Entities and attachments aren't necessarily dangerous, but like, if we don't know what we're doing in that space, it can feel or be dangerous. So that's another reason why I like to bring these things up and really spend some time on it. So like I said, there's no like solid rules here. I have 2 books that I have sitting on my desk, and we have them on the recommended reading list. They're not required reading. But if this is something where you're like, oh, I want to do more work in this, and you wanted to take it farther, this presentation is really just like a get your lips wet. Do you want more? Read some books, listen to some podcast episodes, do some sessions. But the first one is Remote Depossession by Irene Hickman, and the font on the front is terrible. And then the other one is Spirit Releasement Therapy by William J. Baldwin. The Spirit Releasement Therapy is so thick and packed. The Remote Depossession book, if you're like, I may be interested in this is a really quick read, and it's got like good techniques in it and stuff like that. And when we go into the release techniques, just know that I'm taking a lot from this book, a lot from the Spirit Releasement Therapy book, some from the training that I did, and then just like my experience in that space. And then of course, all the training Sarah Leverett has done within her shadow work and all of that. So, okay, so I feel like I went off on a tangent there. All right, boundaries, energetic hygiene, anything that helps us stay intentional day to day. So you can do these every day. You can set it and forget it with your spirit guides or your higher self. Being an intuitive person, working on your intuition, navigating these unseen realms with clients and your intuition, you will just begin to be even more in tune with maybe the attachments that you have or energy that you encounter, where you're just like, ooh, I don't know. I think it might be a Midwest thing, but like basements in the state of Minnesota, it's just like 90% of them must have ghosts in them. But for me, for example, like I can go down in a creepy basement and be creeped out and still be like, bubble of light, get away. Like, everybody get away. Here's my bubble of light. Here's my protection. So just whatever you need to do to feel safe in those spaces. But again, your intention, your free will is your magic and your power here. That's why we use imagery to ground down, to ground everybody into the earth, to open us up to that divine connection, that divine light, and to put that protective bubble around us. And again, we can use that in a session. I encourage everybody to put that in their induction. And we can do it with ourselves when we're in a space that maybe doesn't feel good to us. Just the more we become aware of just the energies that are around us, if we ever encounter something like that. Even sometimes like being trapped on an airplane, like sitting next to someone who's just like, I don't know if you've ever sat next to someone and it's just like, man, they feel so angry. It's just like so uncomfortable to be beside them. We can feel these things on different levels in different ways for all of us. But yeah, Sarah, what are your thoughts on susceptibility?
I don't know why this metaphor is coming into my brain because it's never come in like this before, but I'm just going to roll with it. What I'm hearing in my brain right now is if you don't want to get pregnant, you use a condom. If you don't want to pick up attachments and energies, put up a bubble of light around you. It's like, it's not that you're, gonna pick up something for sure if you go into a crowd, or like you shouldn't be out at a bar, but it's like, if you're going into a place where there's potentially lots of different energies, lots of different people, when people are drinking, maybe tougher emotions do come to the surface. So if you're going into that space, it's just as simple as putting a bubble of light around you or taking one breath and setting an intention. And you're not going to get pregnant every single time you don't wear a condom, and you might not pick up an entity every single time you don't bubble up. But it's just like a simple piece of energetic hygiene, and it's so much more about intention than anything else. I think I agree with that piece.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah. I love that metaphor. We're even talking about condoms tonight. Okay. I'm here for it. Yeah. I can't stress that enough, that our humanness, having a soul, like that is our free will, our intention, that is the most important part of this. And you can just know that you have it and just allow that strength to like slowly build within you if it is hard to believe that you have that. So just some ethics, some things of note behind the release techniques. So when we're with a client, if we encounter any sort of energy like this, just to really, I cannot stress enough, like leave your personal assumptions or judgments just at the door and just get curious. Really, I cannot stress that enough. And of course, not only like if a client is experiencing difficult emotions or uncomfortable emotions in general, it's good for us to leave our assumptions and judgments at the door and get curious. And then even more so, or just as important, if they're bringing up, an attachment or an entity or something that's kind of scaring them, to really not get caught up in the fear and really just ask curious questions to see what's going on here, what's going to happen here. You're going to be able to move through it. You're going to be able to understand it. And I will say, like, getting curious, connecting with your intuition, remembering your power in this situation is going to help you in every situation. I do believe that when a client is in trance, they're so deeply in tune with and, just getting information from their intuition. And so if we as facilitators, even if it is across the internet, can show up in a space that's non-judgmental, and really just, compassionate, non-judgmental, and really just to get curious of like, oh, how is this going to unfold? I wonder what's going to happen next. They can feel that lightness. It's my belief that they can feel that lightness or that confidence, or that curiosity, and it'll be easier for them to kind of model that too. So just really, who do you want to be in that situation? And what would it take to get there, So just this idea of like, avoiding, ignoring, or running away from, or feeling like we need to like fix this problem, or even just using love and light only. And Sarah, I'm going to ask you to touch on that in just a little bit because I love the way you explain that. But what we want to do is just like when we're dealing again with someone's uncomfortable or big emotions, or if they have an entity or an attachment, we don't want to just ignore it or run away from it if the client is willing to do something with it. If the client says, I don't want to deal with this right now, then okay, we're going to go somewhere else and we'll transition them to the next scene or to wherever we're going. But just to know that like us shutting that down, that's something the client feels. And I believe it's harmful to the client. I cannot count how many times I've had a client who comes in, first time client, and on their form, they write something like, I've done hypnosis before. And I always ask about it just because I'm kind of curious, like, how did it go? Are there things that I need to kind of watch out for? Just if they're like, oh, it was really hard for me because of X, I couldn't relax, then maybe I would beef up, the relaxation in the induction. But oftentimes what I hear, and honestly, I've lost count of people saying, well, the session was kind of ended quickly because I couldn't stop crying, or because I was, a part of this, harmful group in the past. And I just think it's such a disservice to the client when our stuff gets in the way of them having an experience and of us leading them compassionately and confidently through any difficult or uncomfortable thing, whether it's an entity, attachment, a difficult emotion, a scary scene in a past life. So it does affect them. So when we just ignore it or shut it down, that is felt. And it's not that no one's ever going to have that interpretation. Someone might say that to you and you're like, that's not what I felt like I did. I didn't, I'm not saying it's always going to go perfectly because of that, but that is really, really important. And I've just heard so many clients say that about previous hypnosis experiences before me of like, oh, they shut it down because it was too uncomfortable, essentially. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, why are we even here then if this is too uncomfortable? But yeah, that it can get real uncomfortable when we're dealing with attachments or entities. And so just really resisting that. Again, I can't say it enough, like understand your fear, be with your fear. What do you need to feel safe in that fear? And then show up, be confident and compassionate in that session. Sarah, do you want to expand a little bit on just the problem with like love and light only? Maybe you can give a little description of what that might mean and just more, I guess, say more about that.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to avoid being super repetitive because we will definitely get into this idea in the shadow work piece. But I'm thinking of a dream actually that I had about 3 years ago now, maybe 3 to 5 years ago now, where I was doing the intuitive work. I was, building my clairs and, at my altar almost every day and on top of yoga. And I just remember like just really begging my guides for more. I want more. I want more. I want more. Like I want to see more. I want to hear more. I want to feel more. And after one of these nights at my altar, I fall asleep. And I've had multiple dreams, multiple hypnosis sessions where I just get to touch that light for just a moment, that pure, unconditional love, that bliss, that all-encompassing kind of feeling. And in this dream, I went back to that space and touched it. And in a split second in the dream, it felt like I just hit the ground and it was nothing but darkness. And those dreams where you feel like you're falling and like you wake up because you finally hit the ground. It was that feeling. And when I woke up, the message in my mind's eye at the very forefront of my awareness was, are you really ready? Are you sure you're ready? And what I took that to mean was that the only way to open up more love, more light, is to go through the darkness, to the other side, to the light at the end of the tunnel. And, I definitely at some points in my journey had fallen into this like love and light only, positive vibes only, right? And what we do when we're in that space is we start putting the parts of ourselves that are scared in a corner, that are grieving in a corner, or shoving our shame into the closet and trying to bury it in love and light. And you can do that for a while, but eventually you're going to need to show all of those parts of yourself understanding, validation, acknowledgement, and embrace it. And for me, it took, going into the darkness to be able to expand into even more love and light. And now I see it more like a spiral than a line. I don't have the intention to progress from the darkness into the light, but instead I have the intention to belong wherever I am in that spiral. And so not only are we shoving parts of ourselves into closets and corners when we are in love and light only mode, but we're shoving our clients into those corners and into those closets as well. Yeah, that's what's coming to the forefront of my mind with that.
Yeah, thank you. I like the way you explain that. And I think that I'm the same way, Sarah. I can see that on my journey too, where it was like I didn't want to really move through the hard stuff. I just wanted to like have the spiritual experiences. And even though I can look back and be like, man, I maybe would be a lot farther if I like really dug into the tough stuff, like the difficult feelings, uncomfortable stuff, like how far I would be. But I think that we all go through that. And I think it's a part of our journey, or it can be just a part of the journey. And so maybe you have a client that's like love and light only, man, only good vibes. Then when we let the client lead, then they will figure it out on their own in their own time. Yeah, I love the way you put that, Sarah. Thank you. And that dream, I can't believe that was 3 years ago. I feel like you just told me that like 6 months ago. Okay. So again, so much repetition here, but it really is simple, like of just like honoring the free will of everybody who's involved, the facilitator, the client, the entity, and just really have compassion and kindness for all. Show up compassionate, kind, confident, ask the curious questions if something comes up, and just let the client lead. If the client is experiencing something, ask a few questions about it. What is it? What do you know about it? What color is it? What shape is it? Where is it? And do you want to release it? Does it have a message for you? There's so many different ways to do it, but it's really, I can't stress it enough. I think compassion is huge, and I think it can go really far to have a facilitator who's calm and compassionate as opposed to one who's very confrontational. And we've seen examples of that, like in the Leo Max videos. He can get like pretty confrontational and even like condescending sometimes. And everybody's got their own way of showing up in their own power, but I just think even that is like can create kind of these theatrics around it that make other people even more afraid. We don't have to show up and like yell at them. I mean, you can, but you don't have to. Okay, so when it comes to like permission or the client's role in taking this on, we had touched on it kind of in the susceptibility of like someone's free will and intention is what is going to bring that on. I don't think, while I do believe that, I do not believe that it's always conscious. like a conscious thing. And I do believe it can come off as very like attacky if we were to ask, like, I'm attacking the client, kind of being offensive. If I ask like, why did you accept this? Or why did you take this on? Or why did you give permission to it? And so if we are dealing with an entity or an attachment, relative to that client, again, staying curious and ask questions with the client's goals in mind. So if you know the client's intention for the session, so you kind of have a feeling of like why they're here, what they want to get out of it, and really keep that in the forefront of your mind when you're questioning the entity or asking the client questions about the entity or attachment. Really stay focused on like, what can we know about it now and how can we move forward? And moving forward is about releasing it. It's about maybe putting something back in its place if you wanted to, if that was a part of the session. But again, trying to like even essentially like put blame or where's the fault on this, I think is a very human thing. It's something that like just drove me crazy when I worked in corporate America, where it was like a problem would go wrong. And instead of being like, this is the problem, how are we moving forward, everybody argued about whose fault it was. It's like, what the fuck? I would like to leave and go home. So really, even though it is our own free will and we can use it how we want, I don't think that that's helpful to like place that as like blame on the client. And so instead, if it is a part of the healing process and what can we know about it, and maybe that comes in, oh, I wanted it because it was helpful for protection, or I didn't know, or whatever, great. But really stay curious, stay focused on like, what is it now? How can we move forward based on whatever the client's goals are? And then again, reading a client or, becoming aware of an entity or an attachment they might have, that is for your information only unless they ask you outright. Otherwise, to put that on someone who you don't know their comfort level with it, or their fear levels with it, or their ability to take care of themselves afterward, I just think it's kind of like an emotional hot potato. Like, or sometimes people might say that, like, you have an entity, and it's kind of like a power move of like, I know this about you. And all of that is so gross. And so really, again, letting that client lead. Okay, so as far as release techniques go, and like, what is this called and what's the history of this? There are so many different methods and healing modalities and ritual things and even like psychedelic things and religions and prayers, all kinds of things that to me are really addressing like releasing an attachment. Again, whether it's just like a stagnant emotion or if it's like a full-on entity attachment, there's so many different ways to look at that and interpret that. And for example, other names are like parts releasement, entity releasement, spirit releasement, energetic cleanse, energetic clearing, depossession even. There's so many ways to label this, but it really is just, in my opinion, taking energy that's around us that we don't want around us for any reason, and we're moving it away from us, or we're helping a client do that. The energetic technique, the energetic release technique that we're going to be talking about. So I'm first going to talk about the energetic release technique. I know we've touched on it in other classes, but I just want to really like, what is it, in case you're like, wait a minute, what is that again? So an energetic release technique is when a client describes like a block or an emotion or an attachment that they can feel or experience somewhere in, on, or around their body. And so what we do is we encourage that client to imagine more about it, tell me more about it, as a way to understand more about that block, that attachment, whatever it is that we want to release. And once they give us some more descriptors on it, oh, it feels like a hollow hole in my belly, or it feels like a heavy weight on my chest or my shoulders. Then from there, we can help them. Okay, so knowing that, how would you want to release that? How do you want to get rid of that? You want to take it off like a backpack? You want someone to pull it off, pull it out, pull it up, whatever, melt it, blow it away, burn it up. But what we want to do is we want the client to even lead that. So even though you're asking those questions of like, tell me more about this block or this attachment, tell me more about it, tell me more about that. What's the color? What's the texture? Where is it? What we're doing there is we're helping the client kind of paint a picture in their mind of what is going on within them. And with that picture, they're able to create in their intuition, in their imagination, this movement of that energy out of them. So if they know, oh, hollow or like heavy thing on my chest, like the woman today, heavy slab of cement on my chest. Okay, how do you want to take it off? She wanted to smash it into 1,000 pieces. Cool, do it. Let me know when you're done. And so the reason why we have the client do that instead of me going, okay, and now this angel or guide is coming and lifting it off of you is because remember, in hypnosis, they need to believe it. Like they are in control. And so if I'm saying things that don't resonate with them, whether it's an energetic release technique or a hypnotic suggestion of some other kind, it's not going to land with them. That's the way the subconscious mind works. If they're like, nope, this isn't for me. So we want the client to describe it. We want the client to be with it, remind them they're safe, get that information, and then now how are you going to release it? Again, they come up with how they're going to release it. If they're struggling, you can give them examples. I always give them a few examples and then say, let me know what feels right, or if there's something else. And again, to release it, they got to believe it. So allow them to imagine it, allow them to tell you how they want to do it. And then say, okay, you're going to do that. Smash it into 1,000,000 pieces. And once you've done that, and those pieces are on the ground around you, I want you to just say, okay. And then I wait, feel free to take your time. Then they say, okay. And then from there, we're going to cue them to like move and transmute that energy. So if we can think of that energetic, whatever that cement slab was, it was a lot of fear and a lot of anger. And it's like, energy never dies, but we can shift, change, transmute it. And so that's what we want to allow them to, in their mind, go with us. So it's like, 1,000 pieces of this concrete block on the floor. Imagine it melting and being sucked into your root system, down into the earth. And the earth is taking it and using it and composting it, transmuting it to a higher frequency of love and healing for everyone on earth, including you. So it's a way to like identify the energy. How do they want to move it out? Once it's out, we transmute it into a higher frequency of love and healing, either through the earth with the 4 elements. You can throw it in the sun. You can throw it in a ball of light. Your imagination is just as powerful. But I always make sure clients are telling me about the block and how they want to release the block. And then I'll walk them through like the transmuting of it. But those are really important pieces to have them lead it, because we want them to believe it. And when we can believe it and when it can be our choice, things are always so much more impactful. I don't think you have to be a rebel to be like, it feels better when I choose to do something as opposed to when someone tells me what I'm going to do. Like we can all feel that. And so that's important here. So again, that's the energetic release technique. You can do that with an emotion, you can do it with a block, you can do it with an attachment, and essentially you can do it with an entity. So we're going to take those techniques and kind of build on them. And that is where I am going to leave it off in this class that you just listened to from the Hypnotic Arts Training. After the piece you just heard, then we went even deeper into the different types of release techniques and explained the different resources that are available to the Hypnotic Arts students. As a student in the Hypnotic Arts Training, you not only get information about entities and attachments and how to deal with them, but we also go even deeper into the topic of shadow work and what it is to offer shadow work and how we can help clients move through that. We also have scripts for the space between lives, like an LBL session. We have scripts for past life regressions, scripts for when your client is stuck in the black, scripts for when your client is just in other tricky situations. So there are so many resources in the Hypnotic Arts Training for anybody who wants to do this work, whether you're a hypnotist now or you want to be a hypnotist. Please check it out. You can find the link to the Hypnotic Arts Training in the show notes. All right, everybody, take anything that makes your load feel lighter and just leave the rest.